Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Well, hello and welcome to this third Soul and Survival podcast where, again, I think I'm going to quickly introduce you to my wife Louise, and I think we're going to go through the same format, if I'm not mistaken, of just a couple of impromptu questions and see where it leads to. So over to you, and welcome to you, Louise. And is that true? Is that the format today? You're just going to ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the same kind of setup. Hi, everybody. Look, Grant and I have some really interesting conversations during the week in between clinic and this, that and the other. We have some interesting chats. And he always says, so what do you want to talk about? And I think the next thing, given that we've touched on a few aspects of HFA and how the clinic is done, is this idea of the psychology of the person or the personality of the person and how much that links to the remedy, the outcome of the remedy and the choice of the remedy. So I'll throw that over to you because it's a big topic. I know it's a big topic, and it's an important topic because a lot of contemporary homeopathy has gone down this pathway, and yeah, you've got some things to say about that.
Yeah, look, some of the things that I'll probably say about that are not as, I guess they're not as accepted, particularly in modern times, because in contemporary homeopathy, as you well know, in contemporary homeopathy, the personality is everything. In fact, the whole idea of searching for a personality profile or a drug profile, you know, that sort of Tyler-esque sort of drug pictures has become the way that homeopathy is practiced, essentially. And so, and look, honestly, I do have my own views on this. I understand about the very Kentian model that sort of developed into a Tyler model, which developed into a Vitulcas model, and it just becomes this ever-increasing emphasis on the personality of the patient being the glove that matches over the hand of the personality of the remedy. And when those two match, then that's where you have your simillimum, and it's become, well, I guess, more and more intricate, trying to find these nuances of one person's behaviour to define that very specific tailor-made drug that is, or remedy for that one particular person. Now, this all, of course, started with Kent. I understand that Hahnemann did talk about the mentals of being priorities, but he never spoke about it in complete personality pictures. He was looking at remedies that, all things being equal, if you also had a couple of personality traits that were thrown in, then that would make one remedy more equal than the other, I guess. And so what he meant by that was that, let's just say, for example, that a person was suffering a cold or flu or whatever it was that they came into the clinic for, and then what would happen then is that after the generals of the case were taken, now that's always very important to keep in mind, because it was after the generals of the case had been taken. Notice one, that was your first priority. That if there were a couple of remedies or a few remedies coming through, and the patient was a weepier patient, then pulsatilla would be a more well-known remedy to fit that person's state of mind, rather than saying a nux. But if a person had become really grumpy and really irritable, then the nux might be chosen over the pulsatilla. So that's when he said that the mentals play this important discriminating part. Now, but the difference with HFA is we've already made this huge discrimination, because if you reckon personality is different from, say, the generals, well, personality's got absolutely nothing as far as individuality when it comes to looks. Your appearance, your facial structure. That has the most unique, it is the most unique aspect out of it. Even more than, look, no one has the same personality. I'm not saying that they do, but we all share certain traits in common. For example, when you talk about women who are mothers who love their children and can't be happy unless their children are happy, we've narrowed that down to probably 99% of the maternal community. So, and even though it's a strong aspect, it's not what you would class as a very characteristic, because so many people share that trait. It's the same as a guy who wants to provide for his family. He takes his role seriously. Well, okay, there's some guys out there that are bums, but the majority of guys are not, and they take their role fairly seriously. And so, as a result of that's not really a discriminating feature. Oh, well, he likes his sport as well, and he likes to have a beer and relax with friends at the end of the week. We're not really getting to the heart of it. And often, if you get to the absolute heart of a personality, you can't find the remedy that matches anyway, because it's so individualized that trying to find a remedy that has exactly that essence is almost impossible. Now, I know that people are going to say that, this is where impromptu probably works against you, because, I haven't rehearsed for this and it's such a difficult topic. But here's the thing, is that you don't have to. Here's okay, I know I'm rambling.
That's okay.
Okay, all right. Here's number one point. Okay, this is very important to understand. That glove to fit the hand doesn't have to be perfect. The hand only has to be warmed by something. It doesn't have to be a perfectly fitted, tailor-made mink glove. So this idea that you have to find a remedy that is absolutely 100% your remedy in order for that remedy to work is wrong.
That's where the similar comes
That's
in.
where similar. It's never been exact. So Hahnemann didn't come up with exactus curenta, right? It was similia similibus. You only have to be similar. Now, the question comes down to similar to what? Now, like I said, in Hahnemann's time, he was the one that said all things being equal, meaning all the generals of the case and the pathology taken into account, the mentals can become an important discriminating factor. But he's not saying the mentals should be the decider of the case. It's only if you can't make a decision and all generals being equal. Right? So that's point number one. The other thing is that when you talk about personality, Hahnemann did say that it was the personality that has been altered since the illness. So it's not your personality per se. It's not whether or not you're a good guitarist or whether or not on your time off you like to work in the garden or you like to tinker on cars or you like... They're not what he's after. He doesn't care about that. What he's saying is any deviation from your normal. So a normally stoic person who is now under... the pain of this illness that they have or this infection that they have, and this stoic person has turned into a crying person and somebody needing of sympathy a lot. Well, now that becomes a change in demeanour, so that becomes a symptom.
Which is nothing to do with the personality.
That's nothing to do with the personality. It was Kent that took it a little bit further. And Kent was the one that first... I mean, we could do a whole podcast. I could do a whole podcast on why Kent is not a Hahnemannian, even though we always have the two faces side by side when we go through the history. And in fact, I think I go through a lot of this when... I've got a book called How Aphorism 27 Changed the World. And in there, I'll talk a fair bit about the differences between Kent and Hahnemann because they're extensive, In fact, I'm not even 100% sure that they would have got along with each other because the way that Kent practiced was completely different from the way Hahnemann practiced. And I can come up with some pretty concrete examples where Kent himself does not practice the way that Kent says to practice. And a good example of this is in Kent's lesser writings, where you get to the end of his book. He's just spent about 12 chapters talking about the economy of the man, the importance of understanding the patient before the disease, all of these sort of things that we've taken for granted. And then he has a whole range of different cases at the end of his book, and yet you look at all of those cases, there's not a mental to be found in any of them. In fact, so he's another one that I don't know. It almost, because we're looking at it in later history. This is one of the big problems with books is that you get a snapshot of thought in time, and then that snapshot is solidified, but you don't know how much people vary. And, in a conversation, you can to and fro so much more easily, and you can understand these nuances, whereas books are blunt. You've got to be really careful with books. They're ultra necessary, but at the same time, you've got to be very, very careful. We're lucky that Hahnemann decided to do 6 updates of his book on the organon, and for that very reason. That you do update your knowledge. But the problem is that if you suddenly die or you've only got one book out there, that becomes your centerpiece. And we in the homeopathic world have a tendency to be fundamentalists when it comes to our authors. We take them very, very literally. We don't look on them as symbolic. We don't look on them as ever-changing values and ever-changing ideas. We have a tendency to look on them as they are rock-solid facts. But of course, there were no rock. The only rock-solid fact in homeopathy is similimum. That's it, the similimum. Now, this is a big part of why I guess HFA is what it is, because I didn't take anything for granted, and I tore the whole thing to bits and rebuilt it. And I rebuilt it by experimenting on all the different ways. Like I think we discussed this last time, doing a whole range of people that were on the centesimals, single dose, centesimals, repeated dose, LM potencies, all this kind, and see which ones come through. Now, I understand that even in itself, as I say, well, that depends on whether you got the right remedy. It depends. Yes, I understand all that, but I'm one person, so I'm doing the best that I can. So I came, and remember, I wasn't doing this for anybody else but myself. I only had to convince myself. That's all it was. But it became so convincing that I decided to share it, or in fact, you decided that I should share it because it was your idea, not mine.
Can I ask you a question when you refer back to that time when you're experimenting? And I know you still do. I know you still experiment quite a lot with case management strategy. But just going back to this topic of personality, of remedies, personality of people, what the link is, can you remember at what point you started to question this idea that possibly there is no specific link between the personality of a person and the remedy that they need?
Well, I worked out, once the face started becoming really prominent and I started using it continuously, and as I got better at it, results exponentially went up. What I decided to do was, I decided to test these personality profiles. So I can remember one of the primary ones was when a green person, tubercular if you don't know the system, came into the clinic and they were very vibrant. I forget their actual complaint. It was a measurable physical complaint. I'll say it was arthritis off the top of my head. It was like they were very young. They were only in their late 20s, early 30s, and they had this quite severe, I'm pretty sure, I'm casting my mind back, I'm pretty sure it was arthritis. And they were vibrant, they were happy, they were sparkly, all the things that you would expect in, say, a phosphorus patient, typical phosphorus patient.
Supposedly. Typical, yeah.
And so what happened was that calc carb was coming up the highest. And phosphorus was not far behind because they're both polycrests, right? So wherever Mary goes, the lamb's going to follow. It's a bit like sulfur and lycopodium, or mercury and aurum, or something like that, or thuya and
sepia,
roost tox or sepia. Yeah, I mean they're not going to be far behind each other, and so there's often not a whole lot to discriminate one from the other, which is why, by the way, just back to the question, which is why the whole mental breakdown, or the personality, the admittance of the personality comes in, because Kent talks about this, right? I mean, why does a remedy that looks so good fail to give what it should be doing? It lacks the oomph, or it runs out of steam. Well, Kent's idea was that there was this nuanced individuality that the practitioner is not picking up between not only the patient but in the remedy themselves. And anyway, we'll get back to it. But further to your story, when I first started to question this is when I would see quite tall, very sparkly, vibrant people, and I'd give them calc carb, and their arthritis got dramatically better. And I mean dramatically better. I'm not talking about 10% improvement, 20% improvement. I'm talking 80% plus improvement. 80% plus improvement. So what are you going to do? You're going to turn around and tell me the remedy's wrong? Or you could have done better? I mean, I can't bear it when people say that,
But just to be sort of on that topic, it's we both saw it. We started to experiment beyond the personalities. The businesswoman who needed pulsatilla, the hard sort
The
of
soft lachesis.
yeah, the soft, sweet, motherly lachesis, the messy arsenicum. There were so many. The really sweet, gorgeous Mercury patient who wasn't homicidal or suicidal or anything. The Aurum patients who had no suicide in their story
No,
whatsoever.
none.
And it just we started to question. So yeah, go back to all of that.
Well, what I started to realise was that, well, first of all, after seeing this over and over again, and I at first I did it as an experiment, and I continued it as an experiment. But then all I wanted to do now was that I look. Sorry, a message just came up, so it diverted me. I found that there were too many people that did not fit the caricature of remedy pictures as I was taught them. Because you got to remember, as you would know, Louise, that I went through the whole Kentian model, and then I went through Tyler, and then I won't go through the modern authors because I'm not trying to run anybody down in any way, shape or form as an individual. Everyone's trying to do their best for this profession. But yeah, the bottom line is that I found out really early that, in fact, while the typical pulsatilla, or what they often refer to in some Miss Pulsatilla or Mr. Lycopodium and all that kind of stuff, these cardboard cutout caricatures that we are meant to represent, and yet at the same time, in the same sentence, that we express that we have individuality and we're our own free will. That doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds like we're caught in this mold, if you ask me, because that's the only way it can work.
But to be just to give a bit more information to those who have been raised on or taught via the personality pictures, and we were, so we understand that style of teaching. And also when you say so many of these personalities didn't fit the remedy, but the reason you knew that was because the remedy was working. And the reason you chose a working remedy that didn't match the personality is you chose it for two other factors. One was the basic miasm of the person via the facial analysis, and two was the totality of the symptoms with real emphasis on the generals. You took that to heart, the generals via Hahnemann and Bonninghausen. And so those two areas were enough for you to say, look, this businesswoman who's come through the clinic, she's really, she's quite a hard-ass kind of person. She doesn't seem weepy or anything, but she's coming up in the dominantly psoric miasm via her face. The revitalization is saying pulsatilla certainly doesn't fit, but hey, I'm going to give it a try. And because you did that, you started to prove to yourself that, in fact, there was so much more scope for remedies than just the limitation of the personality.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say. When we're not cardboard cutouts of remedy caricatures. We're more than that. And so by this woman who was sparkly and not fair, fat, flabby, or depressed, or sad, or anything like that, she responded really well. And that's why I was trying to push that when you're getting an 80% improvement on severe arthritis, you have not got the wrong remedy. So we've got the right remedy, but it's just that the drug picture didn't fit. And so you're either going to say, oh, well, you got the wrong remedy and it was just lucky that 80 to 90% of her arthritic symptoms within 6 months had diminished almost to nothing with the wrong remedy. Well, first of all, how does that happen? And there, even if it is, doesn't that only highlight how much of a simillimum we're actually after? So if you're going to go down that pathway, you snook it either way you go down that pathway. So in the end, I had to reach the conclusion in my own mind that, look, fair, fat and flabby carbs do exist. So I'm not sort of saying...
I was going to say, they do exist, but just not as often as you would expect.
And more than that, like you've pointed out many times when you lecture, is that there are thousands of remedies. There are thousands of rubrics, particularly when you come into polycrest remedies. So, and as a result of that, whenever you've got a personality picture like Mr. Sulphur or Miss Pulsatilla, you're eliminating so many. Like, there's just as many rubrics for irritability and nastiness in Pulsatilla as there is for weepiness. So why did we choose the weepiness as being the caricature?
I really think, and I said this to someone the other day who asked me this same question, it's literally because the more we're doing provings on remedies, the more information we gather. So sulphur's got 30,000, pulsatilla's got 24,000, lycopodium's got 25,000, or, approximately. And the reality is there's no single human brain that can remember all that or cross-match all of that. Even with the best repertory book, something's going to be left out. But then there's this wonderful invention, the end of the 1990s, and this is very serendipitous to HFA, the computer, the homeopathic software system, and all of a sudden now you can access any one of those.
Digital photos for us.
Oh, and digital, and for us the digital photos. We started with the old take the roll to the camera shop thing, but very quickly the digital cameras came out. So these technologies meant that homeopathy could now access all of that information. You can just do a repertorization on 6 or 7 key aspects of your patient's case, particularly the generals, and you can access whether it's sulphur or pulsatilla or lycopodium or mercury or thuya or whatever it happens to be within a minute, like seconds. It's amazing. And so we were raised on the books. We used to sit there and, write down all the rubrics. Paper repertorization is painful and it's so long-winded. And you then want shortcuts. And I believe the personalities were nothing but shortcuts.
Oh, they are. They are absolutely shortcuts, because you're either going to do the mental, dash personality profiles, or you're going to do keynotes, essentially, because you can't do either. You like you said, what are you going to do? You're going to remember what, 20 or 30,000 sulphur rubrics,
and that's only one remedy.
Yeah, it's only one remedy. We haven't even got to any of the others, and most of the polycrests, which you should, and if they don't, that's you're doing something wrong. All these polycrests should form the foundation of your practice, and so if you've got 30,000 per polycrest, I mean, how on earth are you going to possibly remember that? You can't. That's why it's for exactly these sort of things that computers were devised, that to do those things that the human brain just cannot do. We're too busy living life to be able to, because a big part of life is what you're getting on with life is your brain's designed to forget things, not to memorize everything. Otherwise, we'd find ourselves in trouble. We'd never be able to dump the past and move on. So we're designed to forget. And we're going to forget these quick smart. Yeah, okay, you can. There's 4 or 5 things that you might be able to remember from 100 different remedies, hence keynotes. But the other thing that what people do is that we learn in stories. And so we can remember stories and characters better than we can learn bits of information. We retain a character more than we retain a fact. And so when Kent started going down this avenue of the drug pictures, although he would not have endorsed the way that it goes down now, I can tell you. And let alone, this sort of direct linking symbolism of, like, what's your favourite animal? My favourite animal's dolphin. Oh, okay, we've uncovered the mystery here.
Or that
have
sort
dolphin's
of,
milk. I mean, that's
father, mother, brother, sort of thing. I find that really peculiar.
That's nonsense.
I mean, I've been to lectures where they've talked about that, but I've never seen it. And the more you listen to your patients, as you said at the beginning, most mothers love their children. Most people are fond of their brothers, or if they're not, whatever. They may or may not be, but it's got nothing to do with the remedy. So here's my question.
And even Hahnemann, just butting in there, just remember, we've already said this anyway, but remember Hahnemann didn't say to repertorize on somebody's character. He said to reprise on somebody's change of character.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. One word, but it means a lot.
So just to sort of go in a slightly different direction, you do see changes to people's personality after a good remedy's given. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I reckon this has tricked many a homeopath has been tricked by this, including me, by the way. But so there is an automatic assumption that if you're really irritable and you're, I don't know, again, I'm making this up as we go along. So you're really irritable and short-tempered and you're dreaming of ghosts and that's frightening you and you're waking up and having all these nightmares and you're having intrusive, violent thoughts. And then I give you a remedy and all of those things go away, then there is the natural assumption that the remedy has somehow interacted with your personality, with your behaviour. And so therefore, there must be a behavioural aspect of the remedy, meaning that a type must need remedy X. But that's not what happens. It actually doesn't. It doesn't directly alter your personality at all. And I'll tell you how I know this, by the way. So, it's not just about taking my word for it.
And yet, you give the remedy, the personality alters. It's easy to go cause and effect.
No, listen, it is. It's crazy easy to go cause and effect. And that's what I'm about to explain. Because I have been, oh God, I don't know how many years I've been involved with pandas now
I'd say 15.
And I'm regarded as a world expert in this now. And I get recommendations from not just parents and other patients, but recommendations from doctors as of all pandas. Patients, they reckon they will often give referrals to me, to me that just really highlights the importance of having HFA in your arsenal. And in fact, if you're not doing HFA, you're not practicing properly. I'll tell you that right now.
I think
after 30 years experience, I can tell you absolutely outright, if you're not doing HFA, you're substandard.
Yeah, we can say that, having seen.
Sounds brutal.
It does sound brutally arrogant, but the reality is you've been in it 30 years, I've been in it 25, and we have seen so many different outcomes, and there is no doubt this has been the easiest to learn, to teach, to practice, and the best outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's just the fact.
So getting to answer your question then, we need to understand how the body works, not from A and P, but also, okay,
energetically.
Yeah, okay. All right. So, how we were talking about. Were we talking about homeostasis last time? We were talking about an energetic homeostasis, right? So when you go outside of that energetic homeostatic range, you go into fight or flight, or any variation of that you want to call it. But essentially, you go into a self-defensive mode. And that part of that self-defensive mode is that you need a new approach to life. Really, because essentially, look, if you, and I do this a lot with people, I'll sort of say, look, if you're driving down the road, you're listening to your favourite song, you don't have a care in the world, you don't even have to focus on the driving all that much because you're doing it automatically because you've been doing it for so long. So you're listening to your favourite song and reassuring yourself that, in the next trip round, you're going to be a famous superstar, rock star, and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden someone steps out of the curb and onto the road. They're not looking and they're right in front of you. And whatever daydreams and fantasies or thoughts or plans that you have in your mind right there and then are all replaced by instantaneous action. Now, they actually, as a thought process, do not come back into your head until your heart rate and your muscles and essentially the fight or flight response has settled down. Now, then and only then can you start on that real kind of conscious thought or that fantasy or whatever it is where your head was. But while you're in that state of stress, you can't do that. So the reality is this. In every single one of us, there are two people wrapped in one. One of us is the one that we like to exhibit the most and the one we hope we've got the most control of, and that's our conscious deliberation. We're able to plan our day, execute our day, and then look into the future and plan what kind of life we want to be leading when we reach X age and so on. But there's another part to us too, and that is our survival instinct. And our survival instinct is exactly that. It's an instinct. And that instinct is nature. It's not nurture. It's not conscious development. It's not planning or forethought. It's reaction. And when you're in this state of fight or flight, you need to go into a state of reaction, not just physically, but you need to go into this state of reaction mentally as well and emotionally to get yourself out of what is potentially a life-threatening or at the very least a very sticky situation. Now, the reason, once you go out of that homeostatic range that we were talking about, energetic homeostatic range, which seeing someone suddenly in front of your car is going to throw you into, then all of a sudden you are entirely into your survival instinct. Because conscious deliberation takes time and it's really slow. Slow by comparison to instinctive reaction. For example, you touch the pan that's on the stove top. You forgot or you didn't see that you would turn the stove top on, so the pan is really, really hot. And instantly you pull your finger away that touched that cast iron pan before it even has a chance to burn you. And that is what I'm talking about with the survival instinct. Because if you didn't have that survival instinct, your finger would be on the pan and then you go, oh, hang on a minute, did I turn that pan on? Because my finger seems to be awfully hot. And then you lift it up and you look at it and you've got this incredible burn on your finger and you think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Now, obviously, that's not a good working model. So what we need in times of danger is we need a model that doesn't think. Right? We need a model that reacts. You don't want to try and be putting two and two together when you're in the middle of a forest and all green looks the same green and you did hear a sudden noise and a bird did flicker and there does seem to be a movement. All you got to do now is you just have this instinct and it goes run. And so you run and you get out of danger. So in order, though, to fuel these emotions or at least be in harmony with the physical reaction of the survival instinct, your emotions and your intellect both are in harmony with this fight or flight response. You're not half in a response, you're fully in a response. So person X, in their fight or flight response or their survival response, also include the emotions of 1, 2, and 3, and the mental attitude of 4, 5, and 6. Now, they could be irritable, that could be whatever. That doesn't matter. So, if we're talking about, like I was talking about irritability and the person's having intrusive thoughts and murderous thoughts, and there's ghosts in their dreams and all sorts of things, that's just their body trying to make sense of the state that fight or flight response state that their body's in, right? So what's happening is that their nervous system is on a state of red alert. They become really aggressive towards people because the fight stage of fight or flight is their most dominant one. But in another person, it could be they don't want to go outside, they want to withdraw, they just want to play video games, they don't want to interact with people, or it could get worse into like an agoraphobia. So there you're looking at the flight stage, or the anxiety could take off more than irritability. But either way, you're looking at a mental response because that person has gone into survival mode. So it's not just their physical body, it's their mental body, and their emotions have got to go along with it too. So they become volatile in their emotions as well. And even if and I'm just making this up obviously, the intrusive thoughts that they were getting is just their brain keeping them on red alert, that they could, just a reminder, because they're already in fight or flight, that they could be attacked at any moment. And even the ghost is just another symbol of your mind not letting you relax completely because you don't know what's around you. And your brain is saying to the rest of your body that it's in a state of danger because your nervous system keeps feeding it. Because it, just like when kids would, and even now, but I shouldn't say in the past because still happens now, you can throw a fever, but then the fever is there to deal with any infection in the body. But now the fever has got so out of control, so febrile, that it can turn into a convulsion. And now getting the fever down is more important than dealing with the infection. So your body just gets out of whack. And it's the same thing that can happen when you're in a state of chronic stress. You've now gone into a state of chronic fight or flight or chronic survival mode. And your emotions and your mental outlook have to be in sync with the physical stress that your body is feeling. So you're going to either not like the world, want to take the world on, hide away from the world, the whole thing. Now, what happens when we give a remedy is that we take somebody out of that state of either hypertension, energetic we're talking here. We take them out of this fight or flight state and we bring them back into homeostasis. And as a result of that, just like when you settle down from the pedestrian coming out into the street, just once they settle down with that, then conscious deliberation, which has been suspended because you've been in a state of danger or perceived danger, starts slowly but surely coming back again. And this is where you see patients saying, "Oh, I feel like my old self again," or a mother will say to me, "I haven't seen my panda's child this good in years," or they're starting to become interested in reading again, or they want to go out with friends, or I'm able to have a conversation with them, whereas before they just grunt at me or be really aggressive. Now again, we kind of have changed their behavior, but we kind of haven't either. It's about understanding that you have a really stressed behavioral response and a non-stress behavioral response. And what a remedy is doing is taking you out of the stress response into the non-stress response, which is an indirect behavioral change, but I'm not actually kind of getting in there with a energetic scalpel and changing your behavior around. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah, look, it does, but I can understand how it's easy to come up with the simple link between the two rather than the more, it's 2 steps removed at least, and it's energetic. And I guess the reality is, and we'll get into this further along, is that if you can get that face, that structural reality of that face, which represents an energetic blueprint, which was called the miasm, survival instinct, whatever. I mean, that's a whole topic in itself too, the different names for the same thing. If you can get that and the totality, the generals, then somehow the energy does really suit that person. And because it suits them, it turns off this over-exaggerated response that they're having to their environment. It probably started because there was a need for it to start, but now, it just hasn't switched off. It's like an immune system, like you said with the fever. The fever was okay to start with, but it hasn't turned itself off. And I guess essentially somehow, we don't even know the mechanism, but somehow that energetic remedy that matches, it turns off the excessive response that is there for a good reason, but it's not required at that point in time or now. Life's moved on and now you can turn it off. Somehow that's what it does. It tempers it. It brings it back down. It brings it into like you say, a homeostatic place.
Well, your survival instinct or your fight or flight response is there to be for a momentary point in time. Very important point in time, but a momentary point in time. And then that's meant to pass. But homeopathy, everything about homeopathy is a simillimum to how all life works. And the simillimum means that anything that is causing stress causes a fight or flight response if that stress is either really high or really continuous. Now, when I say anything, I mean anything. So, for example, in the modern world, because we're not meant to be eating sugar, by the truckload every darn day, then diets that are really, really high in sugar will throw you into your survival mode really quick smart. And the reason for that is because in the end, it's so hyper-stimulating, you just go out of that range. This is the thing to understand. You only have to be out of that range, and then all of a sudden the same cascade of things begin. That's what a simillimum is, right? So you have, the trigger does not have to be the same trigger to elicit a similar response. That's the simillimum. Right? So yes, it could be a tiger. That's true. It could be. But it could also be your boss threatening to sack you, or your wife's going to leave you, or you're eating too much sugar and drinking too much coffee, or doing too many lines of Coke because your deadline's coming. There's a whole, the amount of things that can take you out of your very small area of comfort into either hyper or hypo response is limitless. And we're not, let's face it, we're not living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Okay, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle is one where your fight or flight response might have been on for an hour or so a day. But if you're at work in a job you don't like and you're eating a whole lot of comfort foods, and then you're coming home to perhaps an environment that isn't that great, and you've got to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things before you even sit down after a full day of work, and you're pushing yourself beyond your capacity, and you're doing it over and over and over again. You're not getting enough sleep, you're not getting enough exercise, you're not having enough contact with people in any sort of meaningful way. These are all stressors that can throw you out of your range really, really quickly. And once you go out of that range, to equal degree will your personality change as you go from an imbalanced personality to a slightly out of balance, midline out of balance, hugely out of balance state. And each one will have its own layers of protection. That's all that this response is trying to do, right? Is that it's trying to protect you. So when you're feeling overwhelmed and your energy is dropping, and that homeostasis is going, it's plummeting, and you need to protect yourself, you start wanting to lock yourself away, or you get grumpy with people. But essentially what you're saying is back the hell off, man. And you need that because you need that space, you need that time. And so it's a self-protective personality trait that comes out because you're in this state of stress. But think about what a remedy is. A remedy is just a package of energy that your body is going to accept or it isn't. And when your body accepts that remedy, and that's the importance of the generals because it tells you where to look. Right? So once you get an energy that's going to be recognized and taken up by self, then, and remembering that all remedies are adaptogenic, meaning that you don't have to worry about the mechanism of hyper or hypo, because the remedy's going to hyper what's hypo and hypo what's hyper. You don't even have to think about it. I mean, amazing stuff, right? And then you don't even have to do, all you have to do is come up with the right remedy. But in order to come up with the right remedy, you've got to understand how the survival mechanism works and what survival mechanism that patient in front of you has inherited. And you can't do that if you don't have the face. That's it. That's full stop. I'm telling you now.
Yeah, the face has just been a doorway. And we'll go further. I mean, the reason this podcast is called Soul and Survival is because you took the HFA model, the clinical model, and then you started looking at these 7 groups, these 7 colours, these 7 miasms, these 7 directional forces, and you started to see incredible patterns in there that were really important. Inherited memory. I mean, we'll go into it later on. It's a whole podcast in it, a whole episode at least in itself. You could go on for years on it, but it's this underlying blueprint, this energetic blueprint. We all have it. We have one of the 7, and you can read it from the face. And once you do, and you cross-match it with the generals, the totality of the case, you are within 5 to 8 remedies of kind of getting really nice responses from your patient. And often the first one or second one, it's not always, but, it's really narrows it right down, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. But in finishing, I guess the question is that, I know that I'm not altering a person's personality, and I have living proof that of why I can firmly state that. And if you take a pandas child, for example, they might come with all these delusions. They come with severe aggression. I mean, I've got kids that are, and I don't mean this in a hyperbolic way either. They are almost homicidal. And you can calm all of that down. But then they get a really serious infection and they're back again. And then you've got to go through the work of calming that all down again. Now, this is where I get really annoyed with that stupid question of, well, maybe you didn't have the remedy right. Well, you try getting somebody who's virtually ready to be committed into a kid that's ready to go back to school or back at school and doing well, and try and tell me that that's the wrong remedy, you're talking to the wrong person. I'm not going to believe it.
Of course it's the right remedy.
Of course it's the right remedy, but, and here's the thing, homeopathy, like all energy, burns itself out, right? So eventually, when some stronger stimulus comes along via infection or whatever it might be, it throws you out of that range of homeostasis. And now you go back into your fight and flight behavior mode again. Now, often not to the same degree, right? That's where it becomes really important too, is that, like I said earlier, you will develop a set of coping sequences and coping behaviors that are equal to the degree of which you are out of homeostasis. You're out of homeostasis a little bit, then you have a little bit of an irritable response. You are out of it dramatically, and all of a sudden people can't even bear to be around you. You're picking fights, you're doing all sorts of things. So what we can do, though, is particularly once we get onto the right remedy, if we can have a little bit of stroke of luck and they're not losing too many teeth and they're not getting too many infections like they're prone to do because their immune systems are here, there and everywhere. But if we can just get a little bit of luck and a little bit of time on a remedy, then what we can do is we can build up the reserves. And where that becomes really important is because it means that it takes more of a trigger to get the same response that they had in the past than what it used to take.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but if it's strong enough, all of those things or a lot of those things come back. And what that showed me was that it's not a layer. Oh God, I hate that. It's not a layer that's removed, never to return. How many people really have layers of headache, layers of PMS, layers of depression, layers of anxiety removed to never come back, ever, and I mean ever? Well, hardly anyone. That's just, that hardly ever works. Now, I mean, you can say, well, yes, it does occasionally, but do you know what? I've built a practice around commonality of response, not the every now and again.
Why do something for 1% of the people when you can consistently do something for 80%?
Well, that's right. And that's the way that I run my clinic. I run my clinic is that I will get the biggest result. May not be the unbelievably 100% perfect, but if you're going to get 100% perfect, you're going to do that for 1% of the population. And what I'm after is that the vast majority of people who I see, I want them to get enough help that they look down the camera at me, because I do it all online now, that they look down the camera at me and say, no, I'm in a good place. I'm happy where I am.
Because it's markedly better. Anything 50 to 80 to 90% better is significant when you've been suffering.
And
that's
often you can't
deal.
get better than that anyway, because they can't change their lifestyle around enough to be able to get rid of that last 10%, or perhaps too much damage has already been done. Who knows? But as long as they are happy with where they are at, then I'm happy with it.
So essentially you haven't altered their personality in a direct way, but by entering into the energetic state of their homeostasis, the hyper, the hypo, and switching that back into a medium area and turning off the survival instinct so it's not overreacting, that you can then see the lovely personality instead of the stress personality. And so it does influence the personality, but you don't use the personality directly to choose the remedy. Not directly. Sometimes you take one rubric if it's very extreme, like Hahnemann said, But so there is a link, but it's not an exact link. It's not a cause and effect. It's not a process that is very clinically usable. So therefore, we really go away from that when we look at our process.
Yeah. So I'm not. That's the bottom line. Is that I'm not fooled into believing that we're changing any patient's personality. I don't believe that. Look, God doesn't trust me enough to be able to alter people's personality and thought processes around. And if he did trust me enough, then he's silly. Because human beings, being what they are just not trustworthy enough with that sort of power. So, no, I've refused to believe that I am directly altering somebody's character with my remedies.
Indirectly.
But I am indirectly, I'll tell you what I am doing. I am directly shifting them from their worst stress state into their best non-stress state. But that's different to changing their personality over.
Yep, I think that's a pretty good place to end. Sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.